Good
It's our
morning.
time. Good morning. Let me show you what I got in that I'm so excited about and I'm completely drinking out of today. It's a little repro, like fucking medieval, like flask.
Oh, wow.
So
And
it
so do you
carries
hang
water
it?
in it
Okay.
and you can hang it from your belt, put a little cork in it.
It looks heavy. It looks like that's pretty dense metal. Is it? Am I just reading that
Oh,
wrong or?
it's ceramic.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
And it's like I don't know. We're going to find out. I think the glaze is a kind of glaze that helps keep the water cool because I think it's
Mm.
seeping through and kind of evaporating because it's really cold.
Well, so that was my next question, which is it looks to me over the camera
Yeah.
like it's metal, right? But and then you said it was ceramic, and I was taken aback. Is the glaze medieval? Like, would that be representative of something that you might see, or you just don't know, or
I don't know. I,
sure,
the Etsy
okay.
seller who sold it to me absolutely told me it was, but like
Right.
that's
Well,
the
no,
authority I'm resting on here.
that's great, right? I like confidence is enough for me most times. in in most cases. Um okay, so
Good morning.
good morning.
How was your week?
What did we do? So I got this Texas thing coming up.
Yeah.
So that's happening in 2 weeks. So I've really just been trying to tie up some loose ends around here so that I can leave.
Are you dropping past here because you have to drive past my house?
So I'm not though, right?
Oh.
So I might there's a slight possibility I'll be able to do it on the way back, but on the
Okay.
way down, I'm going to actually be going through St. Louis.
Oh
So
yeah,
I'm going to
okay, that
be
makes
basically I'm
sense.
going to be skipping. I'm going to be going the other way, or like going around you. Um, so, but yeah, so that's so that's happening. I'm excited about that. I'm trying to do a bunch of fencing just because you know, it's so easy when you're coaching all the time to lose your chops, not just your technical chops, because actually I don't find that I lose my technical chops that poorly, but what I find is I lose my muscular endurance. So
Yeah, for sure.
and particularly holding a sword out in front of you, and I use a pretty, like, I use a Halberd, which is sort of 3.7, 3.8, which is like, that's a heavier sword, and it doesn't feel heavier. It's made so that the balance, like, it moves super smoothly. Um, that doesn't feel like it's any heavier than an Albion Meyer or something like that.
Sure.
That being said, it's a pound heavier, and your muscles, like, even though they don't feel like, oh, this feels great, like, after a few minutes, if you're not used to using it, then your muscles are like, hey, you've been carrying an extra pound. And then also I've been using the Pro gauntlets, um, which is they're awesome gloves. They just
Yeah.
don't fit me exactly right, but they're super cool, but they're also very heavy. And so I've just been trying to get a lot of reps in,
Mm.
fencing reps in, just so that I can get used to. It was actually this is gonna be a nice way to break into our topic for today, but
Yeah.
just getting used to, having my sword extended with the extra weight of the Pro gauntlets, and using the Pavlomak to build up a little bit of muscular endurance, so that I'm not like, I can only fence for 4.5 minutes before my arms just like, I can't lift the sword anymore.
All right.
Well, and it's funny because this happened to me when I first, like, before I bought the Pavlomak. I was at Long Point 2019,
Yeah.
where we first met, or
Yeah.
where we first connected in person, and Stephen Chaney had a Pavlomak, and I didn't have a sword at the time, and I was like, hey, can I use your sword? And he gave me his sword. And I was using it. I was like, this is great. This is fantastic. I felt super great using it. And I was like, I need to get me one of these, and but I only used it for like 2 minutes. right?
Right.
So like I was like immediately went back, try to figure out where I can pick one of these up, and I did, and I got it, and I was like, oh, it feels great. It feels just like I, remember it. And but then I was fencing for like 4 minutes. I was like, oh, I can't lift my arms anymore.
Yeah.
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 So that's been my week, and sort of that'll be my
Nice.
upcoming week. What about you?
Oh, you know what? It's just due to the vagaries of life. I helped 3 separate friends move this weekend.
Oh wow.
So like my grippers are like so
Mm.
sore. I'm like trying to like brush my hair and I'm like, oh,
Ah,
my hand can't
it's like
close.
cramping. That's really funny.
So I hear you, right? Like, but yeah, no. So I definitely got my workout in this weekend. But it was good. It was good. We had good weather for a move, which is rare, and I appreciated
Yeah.
it.
It's sunny today. When I was walking the dog this morning, I was like, when you feel the rays of sunshine, like especially right at the end of winter, I kind of felt that, and I was optimistic. I remain
So good.
optimistic that we're getting close to the end of this. So today, well, actually, we'll say one more thing for next
Okay.
week. For next week, we're gonna do our technique talk, right?
Yes.
And so for the audience, that's going to be, you're going to play a role here. Um, we'd like to hear you just feedback with regards to what text, and specifically we're looking at stuff from the Ringek Danzig Lev, the Lichtenauer tradition more broadly. Really, as far as I'm concerned, you can extend it out to Meyer. I'm sure that
Sure.
Jesse, you got lots of stuff to say about Meyer. I'm sure
I'll
if you
totally jump in.
you
Yeah.
listen to a quote and you say, "Well, this is the way that I understand it," right?
Yeah.
But anything that you're interested in talking or hearing us talk about, or just stuff that's giving you trouble, we can't promise that it doesn't give us trouble, but but what we can do, because we've invariably thought about it and have come to some sense of not conclusion, but we know where we've left off. Right? I think
Right.
that's the best. That's the best way to think about that, right? Like we know where our understanding ends, right? And
Yeah.
we're maybe we're not satisfied with it, but we've we've
Yeah.
left it there, and we can speak confidently about that. So yeah,
For
so
sure.
any and hopefully we get like 3 to 5 snippets of text, and I think that'll probably take us through the whole episode. If we get more, then maybe
Sure.
we do more another episode or something. But so that'll
Yeah.
be for next week,
Yeah.
guys. So submit those, and you can submit those in the comments, or you could submit them on Jesse's Patreon, or you could submit
Mhm.
them on Facebook or wherever you see this posted, or you
Yeah.
just send a message or whatever. It's fine. So
Yeah.
yeah, so that was that. But then
And the
today,
second half, hold up though, the second half
yeah,
of Will the Change will come out after that.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, okay. So today, and you see you've got Goliath in the background there. Goliath is
Sure enough.
my favorite. Those are my favorite images. I just love them so much.
They're good ones.
And yeah. But you've got armor, and I'm happy to see that. What's the story with that armor? Well, before we kind of jump in, the armor in that is a little different than like some of the stuff that I see most historical fencers, armored fencers wearing. So what's different about that?
Well, it's later period, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's more of what I mean. I'm not good at technical terms with armor, to be honest. Like that's a
Sure,
whole
sure.
study, and you know. But it's just that it's that later period. It's more of what I think of as a Maximilian style.
Mm-hmm.
They're wearing fabric. I always heard it called bases, but a fabric skirt with with their armor. It's a certain look, and it's a lot more coverage than what a lot of us run for, because armor changing means technique changes, means potentially everything changes, right?
Yeah.
So
I think that's interesting. So we're talking about armor today, and and just to keep riffing on this Goliath stuff. So Goliath is a manuscript that was written in the early,
15.
certainly the early 1500s, potentially like 1520s.
Let me see what Mr. Chittister has to say about it. Because I do have it pulled up right here. He says between 1535 and 1540.
Okay, great. Yeah. So really late, right? Like not relatively late, like the end, right? The end of so how would we make that distinction, right? So the end of armor, well, so like, is it the end of the night? They certainly used armor. Of course, my phone is ringing.
That's okay. It's all right.
Can you hear it?
Yeah, I can hear it.
So it's the end of full coverage armor on the battlefield, right? Or at least sort of as the major weapon of war, right?
I think I would agree with that. I don't think it ends knighthood, though. I mean, like, we like to say Maximilian was the last knight, right? Like, that's
right.
I mean, that's how the Met presented him when we went to New York, and certainly this is post Max. I think Max is passed by this point,
I mean, there are knights right now, right? So like it's
precisely.
It's all a matter of how you want to conceptualize.
Yeah, and I think drawing a hard line is what we like to do, and it's wait, what did we say last week, that the argument needs more complexity? Yeah,
complex theorizing, right? Yeah,
there we go. Yes. So that I know a lot of us would like to say, okay, the knights are done by now. Now, fencing has become like a burger activity, and it's totally different, and everything's changed, and blah 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 blah. But they were holding jousts for like another 150 or 200 years or something, right?
Yeah, most certainly, and we know that we have field armor from later than and also, and just like we have like 3/4 coverage armor,
right,
for forever, right, for like another couple of hundred years anyway.
Yeah.
And so like how do you want to make the distinction, right? That's really what it boils down to, is like, and how and why. So but in any case, so I'd like to hear your thoughts, a little bit more of your thoughts on what's going on with the armored combat that we get from the texts, and the way that it sort of evolves, like how you view the context in which people were using their armored fencing, whether it be on the battlefield or whether it be in judicial combat or tournament combat, and how that evolves up until the period. So the last publication that I'm concerned with vis-a-vis armor in the quote unquote Liechtenauer tradition is Meyer. I don't know if you've seen the new Meyer, but I cannot tell you how excited I am about that. For a couple of reasons. Most importantly, probably, is that it's the armor. It's of my preference, right? Like I
Yeah.
love that style of armor, and
Mhm.
so now I have a source to point at and be like, this is, because that's where we get our validation from in the historical fencing community. So
That or
anyway,
ass kicking. Those are the
right.
only two ways.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay, so go ahead. So tell me about how you view the armored combat from the texts and how it evolves.
Yeah, I mean, uh, my take is that it's pretty evident that the RDL sources are referring to a duel of some kind, right? Where probably the people have matched weapons, matched armor.
Hmm.
Um, and, whether we want to call that judicial or honor based or formal, or right, there's a lot of words we could put to it, and experts in that field have very strong opinions about which each of those mean.
Hmm.
And like HEMA gets real sloppy with all those terms, and I'm going to be careful about that, and say I don't know what kind of duel it is, and I don't know that we do, right?
Well, I mean, so what I would make a case that what we're actually seeing in the texts is is an approximation of a duel, right? So it's training. What we're seeing in the text is training, right? Full stop. Like we're not seeing the duel. We're not seeing a judicial duel or an honor duel or some other kind of formal combat, right? Like we're seeing the pedagogy of how to train for various ways in which that might be manifest. Does that make sense?
Yes, I
Would
think
you?
what's specific and what trips people up is that the pedagogy of the harness, people want to separate from the Ross, and I don't think you can or should.
Mhm.
And and that pedagogy follows the logical progression of a duel,
Mm,
right? And
sure.
so it's different than the Bloss, which seems to present, I think we have made this argument on the podcast, but, or maybe not, maybe we've just talked about it, but that seems to present in a way that's specific for learning fencing and for
Mm,
understanding these terms.
mhm.
Whereas the dual section seems to be using the framework of a duel to present how to do it.
Right. Right. Yes. Yes. Okay. And I think you're right. I think that is easy. It's easy to um, be less precise once you start talking about this type of thing, right? So we can
Yeah.
say that we can, yeah. So we can say that what we're reading in the texts is, I mean, it's an educational text. Like the text is trying to teach you how to do things, right? That's what that is, right?
It's
And
trying to remind you of what you've learned.
sure, right, right, right.
It is not trying to teach you the damn thing.
Right. um, but uh I do like that we're sort of, um that we're sort of outlining the fact that the pedagogy itself seems to be a reflection of some particular context,
Okay.
right?
All right. I
Right.
know this is what we're supposed to talk about, and I've never until this moment dug into this. Pedagogy
Mm,
is not the right term,
okay.
right?
So
We
yeah,
need to figure out another one,
right.
because there is no pedagogy, because it isn't to teach, it's to memorize. So it is
Mm,
a mnemonic
mhm.
structure. That sucks. We need a better word than that, but there
Right,
is a structure, right? But the structure isn't for instruction. The structure is for memorization and recollect.
right, right.
Anyways,
Yeah,
future
no, it's
topic.
yeah, it is. No, it's a great it's a great insight. Um,
I've never thought that until this moment.
sure.
This is a new
Well,
thought.
Right. Just this idea that the information should already be there, and how does it get there? Right, like it got there from all of your experience training, right? So like
Right.
you know, you've already presumably you've spent 10 years doing this, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Or whatever. Like you've already done, like, and you already have such a strong um yeah. So anyway, okay. So that being said, the Ross and the armored section seem to be a reflection of a particular way that violence is manifest,
Correct.
is what you're saying. A particular context in which, so even though the things that we're learning, or the things that we're exercising, the things that we're developing in ourselves through the application of this process, right, are
Hmm.
useful across a variety of contexts that we might find ourselves in, whether or not it be on the battlefield or whatever, right? Like
Hmm.
it follows this framework, or you know, it's representative of a particular way that works.
Correct.
So,
And I
so tell
think
me
we
more about that.
know that. I think we know that because of number one, the weapons that are being presented. So lance, sword, dagger, right? Which lance can be spear, right? Interchangeable ideas there. And the when you face someone else, fall to the half sword, right, or fall to the armored hand, or fall to, you know, whatever specific technical term gets used, right? Shortened sword, you know, um, that is not a battlefield approach. It
Hmm.
just isn't, right? In a battlefield, you're going to be confronted with mixed armors, some armor, no armor, different weapons, different, you know, multiple versus one versus multiple, trees, terrain,
Hmm.
right? So you know, you're not
Right.
gonna
So
be
so
like,
it may be.
well, here I am in my guard.
Right. So it may be, so it may serve as a limiting principle, right? So even just like, okay, we're going to think about, we're creating this training environment. It
Mhm.
has to look like something. And so what might it look like? Well, here is here's a way this works. We'll use this, and this will be our framework, so we can explore these various options. It makes
Mhm.
logical sense. It also is an accurate, or at least a semi-accurate reflection of what this particular context might look like,
Yep.
right? You know, and so it's a limiting principle so that we can use it as a meditative tool to expand our understanding of the things that are happening inside this, and then eventually be able to uh, maybe extrapolate some
Mhm.
broader ideas that are more generally applicable to, you know, whatever life. um okay.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility. Mhm.
Right. Okay, so do you know if this context that it's represent that the structure of the Ross and the short sword is representative of, do you know how late that carries over? So I think, so by the time you get to Meyer, that's not really true, right? So like Meyer doesn't have the same, he doesn't take the same approach to, or at least in terms of like, Meyer doesn't have a Ross, right? Meyer um, isn't following the same format, and is that because that the way that duel works has changed by the time Meyer's writing for it? Right? Armored combat looks different,
Is he
or
writing for a duel? Does he say that?
uh, no, or at least I'm gonna have to. So Kevin only just recently
Yeah.
uh, published his translation, and I've
And
read
I haven't
through
gotten
it.
it yet.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, so it's online. I'll send it to you.
Oh, cool.
I
Thank you.
I haven't I have read through it, but I don't have it committed to memory, so I can't tell you.
Yeah, sure.
Um,
Yeah, I would wonder about that, right? I would wonder about that. And see, the thing that gets interesting is, you know, Maximilian in Freydal, he has all of these people fencing for fun and tournament in full harness. Like the same harness we're seeing here, right?
mhm,
But the context is tournament, but they have a sword and buckler or a sword and targe or whatever, right? And so it's clear that by then you're donning your full armor to go fence your friends, and that's your protective gear if you're rich enough, right?
mhm.
Because we know there are effectua happening. And and in Weisskönig, Max says he learned to fence Bloss, right? So that he could get good at armor. Like he clearly creates a hierarchy, and Bloss is like at the bottom from his perspective.
Right. So yeah. I think it's interesting. Well, so okay. Here's another question that I have. So this latest armor, right? The armor from the, we'll say, 1520s up through the 1560s or
Sure.
1570s, right? Is like full coverage, right? So when I've asked Greg about it, and I've asked a few other people about it, like why do I see so much in terms of the Dekoven style armored combat, or the CFAS type stuff that you see? Why does it stop at like the 1480s, we'll say, right? Where, in terms, like I never see anyone with an Almain collar. Sometimes you see people with pauldrons, but
Yep.
for the most part, people forego the pauldrons. And the answer I've gotten is, well, how fun is it? Based on our rule set, we're trying to target the points that the articulations that were exposed in the time that the manuscripts that we're reading, were being written, and like by the time you get to Myra, or even if you look at this Goliath image, there's nothing, right? There's so little exposed here. They've got they look like there's articulations in like the elbow pit, right?
Yeah.
Articulations.
Yeah.
So it's just crazy.
There probably are.
Right. And so what's your sense of that? Is that like, how much does that play a role? And then also I have a question about mobility, right? Because I think my initial impulse was like, oh, they don't want to use pauldrons because you can probably not hardly move in them well.
No, that's not it.
No. So tell me more.
No. No, like some of the extant pieces, many of the extant pieces. Well, okay, let's do this. Let's back this up. This full coverage armor we're seeing here is a fucking Porsche. So it's like asking, how come nobody's driving a Porsche at a Formula One? And it's like the answer there, I don't know. But like that's kind of what we're asking here. And so it isn't that it wasn't easy to move in. It was probably easier to move in than the stupid shit we're wearing, right? It's that we don't have cash. That's the real answer.
Yeah.
Right? None of us have the cash to replicate one of these in our size for us at the level it was done. Like,
Sure. Yeah. That makes sense. Like, because there are all-main collars. Like you can buy an all-main collar for $70 on eBay.
Right. And not
Right?
moving it.
And then end up killing yourself.
Right.
Um,
So that's a big part. And see, this circles around to like my interest in fashion and my interest in so many medieval recreations used very loosely here.
right.
Is that we
Oh,
often
will you
seek a look, not a function.
remind me to send you the video that we watched like a year plus ago on medieval dance, where
Yeah.
the first 5 minutes she just talks about how to think about recreation. I
Yeah.
think that is just so unbelievably valuable, and we'll have
Okay.
to make sure that we share that with the audience. But yeah,
Okay, so that'll be in the
description. Yeah. But anyway, sorry. I just, when you said like recreation in the loosest terms, I was like, yeah, someone's already addressed this, and we can just use that. they can tell the audience how to think about recreation.
Right.
Sorry.
So I mean, this comes to like us talking about medieval footwear. This comes to us talking about you name it, right? But we go, oh, well, it looks like it, so it is, and that is no, right? The pro gauntlet, right, moves and weighs closer to my medieval gauntlets than it does anything else I've seen, right? Like I just wear my steel gauntlets.
Right.
Because I have more mobility and they weigh less than for instance, the Koenigs, right? I have more protection and they weigh less and I have more mobility. And they are off the rack gauntlets.
Right.
Like, what are we doing with our lives here in HEMA? I don't know. Like, wasting a lot of time trying to solve problems that got solved.
Sure. Okay. All right. So let's continue. Right. So
Okay. We will put that down.
So now I'm curious as to like what it was that made you so you started out like everybody else, right? Which is to say that you didn't have you didn't go into it with the idea that your goal was to like get really good at the armored combat part of this thing,
No.
right? Like you wanted to learn how to fight with a medieval sword or whatever.
Yeah.
And then like at some point you were like, okay, whether it be just because of the nature of the curriculum that I'm exposed to or the community that I'm exposed to or what I see in these texts that I think are really important. Like, what was it that made you say like, okay, this is it. I am going to become a super competent armored fencer?
Because Tobler told me I had to.
Yeah.
So this is why having a mentor is invaluable, in my opinion. I had less than zero interest in armor. And at some point in my studies, it must have been after I did my scholar examination with Christian Tobler. We were talking through, AOL Instant Messenger, as one did at the time, in case you want to know how long ago this was. So we're talking on AOL Instant Messenger, and he's like, hey, so how has your armored study been going? And I was like, oh, I don't really care about armor. And he said, yes, you do. And I was like, no, I really don't. And he was like, well, the reality is that if you aren't studying it, you're not getting all of Leichenauer. And so it's kind of not a choice. Like if you want to go any further, with our curriculum and the way this works, you just have to. And I was like, okay, right? And like all like petulant about it. And for about like 10 minutes. And then I started looking at it and was like, this is fucking cool. Right. And like immediately got into it. And still the material culture of the armor is not my jam. That's why like people are like, what style of helmet is this, Jess? I'm like, I don't know what that's called. I don't know. Right. I just want to use it. Um, but in the use, I've found so much joy. I absolutely love it. I love fencing in it. I love what it does to my body. I love how it enables me to fence. So
Yeah. So I could go like 7 different directions here. But I guess the last one, we'll start with the last one, or at least the second last one. The what does it do to your body?
It makes me so butch, and I love it.
So just
Right?
you mean in your movement, or you mean like in terms of like being strong through various ranges of motion that you need to be strong through because you're carrying the weight of the armor, or like yeah, go into more depth about that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just going to keep it about weight because that's the easiest to understand. But I mean, there's some other pieces. But so like I don't weigh a ton. And so when I fence, even bloss, right? That comes into play. Because if you are striking with a step, and I am striking with a step, and you, James, are striking with a step, and we're both throwing good blows.
Right. So like, so if everything is equal, like ceteris paribus, if we both strike in to claim the center with the sword, right, and we strike
You
in at the
will,
exact angle, exactly,
yes,
right, like we both strike in the exact same angle with the exact same structure and everything, I theoretically should win because of my weight, right? So like,
correct.
now you can mitigate that by turning a little bit to the left or whatever, right? There are ways to deal with it, but that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that presuming you don't, right?
Right.
I have a natural advantage.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. And anyone who tells me that isn't true is a big person.
So sure. Well, I mean, it's just physics, right? Like it's not, it's not, like I think people do often get hung up on that though, right? Like, so they think, well, because of this, quote unquote natural advantage, no, it just means that you have to fence differently. Like
You just fence different. Yeah.
it's not insurmountable, right? You
Right.
just have to change your angle. You have to be a little bit more. And then also the other thing that we tend to think about is that we tend to think about this from a scientific perspective, which we've only lambasted since the inception of this podcast. Right? So like we tend to think about this scientifically, and so we take the art out of it. The fact is, even given my advantage, right, we have such, as a community, we have so little mastery of any of this stuff that the difference, as real as it is, right, ceteris paribus, is so marginal when the rubber meets the road, because no one's optimized, right? No one is acting scientifically, period, right? Like no one in our community is fencing according to the science of fencing. We all kind of suck. And so like it's probably the difference is probably negligible if you put the effort in to learn how to fence well, right? Like in terms of you fencing most people, it's not
Right.
something that you can't, I would almost say like easily get over if you understand what you're doing and you go to the effort to like work to understand and mitigate it, right?
Absolutely. Right. And so is this something that gets me down? Do I go, oh man, I got to fence James and he's got, some poundage on me. And like now, no, it doesn't get me down at all. I fence according to the principles which negate that situation. But what that means is I have to constrain the parts of fencing I get to explore.
Mm.
And I'm here to explore it.
Yeah.
So I don't get to explore equality, almost never. And even less frequently do I get to explore being
Bigger.
big.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So as a result of that, like, as someone in the modern world that doesn't need to like live by this, it kind of bums me out sometimes, right? And especially when you come to, especially when you come to wrestling at the sword or slices or like some of those things. Some of those things I just, if I want to quote unquote be successful with my art, I just don't get to do them.
Right.
So
okay,
when I
so
put
but
on
getting
armor,
yeah.
all of a sudden, so my armor is 65 pounds, right? So, so I go from 135, right, to 200 pounds.
Yeah.
And the difference between fencing at 135 and fencing at 200 pounds is insane.
Yeah. So that's a wild insight. So, in sort of competitive combat sports, we have weight classes and they're huge. Everyone knows, everyone understands the difference. And when there's a huge weight disparity, everyone kind of takes it for granted that the advantage is so great. I've often thought about why that is, right? What like obviously there's the moving of the physical weight. Like for me, to move someone else, if they're heavier, then it will be harder for me, right, to move them. But also they become stronger just by virtue of carrying around that weight, right? So like their muscles are more powerful, right?
Yeah.
And so I put a lot of thought into how much of one versus how much of the other are we witnessing when we're watching the um, the outcome of a huge weight disparity, right? In a combat sport, like how much is because the person is so much stronger because they have more muscle mass and they're just carrying around more weight, or stronger given proportionately stronger, or absolutely stronger if not proportionately stronger,
Right.
or how much is it that the other person can't move them because of the weight. And what you're suggesting here is that there's a lot that has to do with the fact that now you become not immovable, but you become much harder to throw around, right? If you're 200 pounds, so
Right. Like you absolutely can bench me when I'm not wearing my armor.
right.
But like maybe when I'm wearing my armor, you're having a hard time benching me. Like I don't know what you're benching right now, but
Sure.
you see my point, right?
Totally. Yeah.
And so
Do you
it
think
gives
you become stronger?
yes.
So not only is it harder for me to move you, but just because of mass, force equals mass times, right, whatever. Because you have that armor on, you are physically stronger.
Right, because momentum. Because
Yeah.
I get myself moving if I take a step and a thrust, like just keep it simple, right? But I take a step and a thrust, me without armor, I'm going to bounce off you. Me with armor, I'm going to move you.
Yeah. Right.
I literally become stronger. It's amazing.
Yeah. So it's so funny because that's not what I was thinking at all when you said what it does to my body, right? I was thinking about how it strengthens your body, right? So like
Also
after
true.
you take the armor off, right? Like I imagine it teaches you um how to move, right? For me, I'm always talking about feeling and sensitivity, and how relaxation is a sort of fundamental feature of
Mhm,
feeling like being alive but not pushing, right?
mhm,
Being sticky, uh, and so like there's the economy of motion, but then there's also the economy of structure, right?
mhm.
And I imagine that are you are kind of forced to learn very quickly how to move in ways that are super economical and super strong structurally, when you're carrying all this extra weight, but not carrying the extra muscle, right? So like,
right. Well, I mean, we could straight up quote one of the glosses for that, where it says that you shouldn't be springing. You should be taking small steps and one at a time so that you don't burn yourself out. Like the gloss flat out says that. Right? So, you know, sometimes we mythologize the old masters, right? And suggest, well, you know, get good. You shouldn't be tired, get good. Nah, they're flat out saying you're going to be tired. And of course, that only makes sense, right? I mean, think about what it does to my heart to drop 45% of my weight on and then go do cardio. Right?
Right.
That's some shit.
Right. Well, and you'll learn to do it back. You'll learn to. So I think, you know, one of the things about getting stronger, that I don't think as a society we've really wrapped our head around, or as a community, maybe as a community of fencing or a community of athletes, writ large, that we haven't really wrapped our head around, which is that so much of getting stronger is just teaching our body how to move, right? It's like, we're not, you know, we tend to, when we measure strength, we measure it in absolute pounds, right? In a lift, right? Like that's how we measure strength.
Sure.
Or at least that's one way of measuring strength. And that's a pretty common way of measuring strength. If you asked any random person on the street, how strong are you? Their mind is immediately going to go to like whatever their bench or squat or deadlift is, right? Like that's,
yeah.
So, but so much of strength. So strength is a function of all of these different things, right? Strength is a function of your muscle mass, right? So that, but strength is a function of the economy in which you can activate your muscles, right? So like, it's possible for someone who is much smaller, right, to lift as much or more than someone who is much bigger. Even and if we're just talking about pure muscle mass, so I'm not saying like if someone who's carrying a lot of fat, right? I'm saying like,
right.
You know, pure muscle mass.
We've all seen old farmers do scary shit, right?
Exactly. And what it is that, you know, strength has to do with muscle mass and size and momentum and all these things, but it also has to do with how well you can harness what you have, right? So it's like the efficiency of an old car, you know, a 60-year-old car versus the efficiency of a car today. Right.
And efficiency was the word I was about to use, because this is why even weightlifting is a skill.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because you learn a certain coordination that makes you in effect stronger. Right.
Exactly.
So
and you know, it's so hard, I think, to wrap our heads around that, like that what's happening in gaining strength is, it actually has more to do with teaching our muscles how to work, or teaching ourselves how to use them. Yeah, it's all neurological, right? Yeah. I mean, the muscle mass and momentum and all these things do play a role, but like,
of course,
again, on the margin, right? So for instance, like people who are interested in gaining strength and who want to use size as a vehicle, like use increased size as a vehicle to gain strength. It's like, okay, increased size will gain you strength, but kind of like, you're so far away from your potential strength right now. Why would you want to gain size? You know what I'm saying? Like, what's the point of that, right? It's not going to be, it would be as effective for you to just teach your body how to use the muscles you have rather than bulking up.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, all this to say,
right?
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and we see this in a good example is, okay, so I will get the link for this. Let's remember this as well. And we'll put it in the show notes. but watching an old judo master throw people around, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Can he outcompete those young guys? No, right? His cardio's gone. His base strength is gone, right?
Mhm.
But does he have a sick level of coordination
Mhm.
that allows him to, in a short, constrained moment, pull off a throw he shouldn't be able to do? Absolutely. And that's just pure coordination, right?
Mhm.
There's nothing left but that.
Right. Right. And but yeah, it's so easy for us to separate, right? But it's a difference in degree rather than in kind, right?
Yeah.
Because it's all coordination,
Right.
right? So there's no difference if we're talking about how strong they are, right?
Right.
If the way that we measure it is their ability to perform a throw, then he's stronger,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Um, and so, but so because we're so conditioned to think about strength purely on the basis of like your ability to move a weight on a bar,
Mm-hmm.
then but that's not the strength we're.
So to take
Okay.
this to armored training, one of the things that I will frequently do with new people, because of course at this point when somebody comes in my school, like they end up doing armored training as part of their warm up. I mean, I don't tell them that's what they're doing, but that's what they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so because of this coordination idea. And so what we'll do is we'll set up my Bob punching dummy, right? And I've got, I don't know, 150 pounds of water in the bottom of it. It doesn't move, right?
Mm-hmm.
Easily, doesn't move easily. And grab staves or spears or whatever. And, you will sheath in a thrust in. So you'll thrust your arms way out and couch and see if you can knock Bob over with one step.
Right.
Right. And there's only one way to do that. If
Yeah.
any of your coordination falls apart, I don't care how big you are not moving Bob.
Right.
And so, but anyone can move him if you have your coordination there.
Yeah.
So it's about
because it's not the strength of your arms. That's what
Nope.
That's again, it's and that's true. And as far as I can tell, it's true in all thrusts. In fact, yesterday during fencing,
right.
we were talking about the difference between sort of extending your arms before you step versus extending your arms during the step. So timing
Yeah.
the extension,
Yes.
extension with the foot landing, right?
Mhm.
Versus timing the extension with or beginning the extension in the beginning of the action, right? Because if you time your extension with the foot landing, you have to start extending your arms after you raise your foot, right? Like
Yeah.
I don't know. Sorry, it's
no. Yeah,
pretty convoluted.
I had to follow it, but I'm with you. Yeah.
And so we spent a bunch of time on that. But someone made the point that it's like it feels like you're losing power, right? It feels like you're losing power because you want to like do this at the end. So like when you're making contact, you're like doing this,
Yeah.
and it's like, and it's like, well, so first of all, none of the power of this action is coming from this. Like this is not powering anything, right? I don't have enough strength in my forward deltoid to like to do anything, right? What I want to do is I want to put my body behind it, right? So like I'm getting my extension out there, but the power of the thrust is coming from the momentum of my body, right?
Yeah.
Going forward, it's just 200 pounds in motion, right? So like that's that, and so it's exactly what you're talking about, right? It's like I don't want to snap my sword out in a thrust to try and knock Bob over. It'll never happen, right?
Never.
I need to put, but that being said, if you've got 130 pounds, 135 pounds, and you're putting all of that in motion at Bob, you can knock Bob over.
Absolutely.
Right? Anybody can, but it's like you say, it's about not only being able to coordinate, but understanding, right? Or at least, I mean, I feel that having a deeper understanding of what's happening is more useful to being able to program your body to do it.
Right. Yeah, no, I completely agree, you know, and in some ways in armor there's a slightly more complex coordination that has to occur on that thrust.
Mm-hmm.
Not has to, but you know,
winds up.
We should train.
Right. Sure.
Because that thrust is going to land, and that is not the end of the fight, which is the other thing I love about armor.
Sure.
Right? So what? So what? You landed a Shisen. You better do something else. You better keep fighting. You better stay focused, or it's not going to happen, right? And so you have this whole crazy interplay. If you really want to dig into it, talking about technique, maybe we'll save it for next week, right? But that you're gonna try to Shisen and land that thrust with a movement of your forward leg, right? What we might call an advance. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to coordinate your body behind that. And then you have to drive that back shoulder and wind the sword into this couch position and drive the back foot to actually get to the end of that whole thing. Mm-hmm. So it's a series of movements that if you do it wrong, you're going to weaken or shorten or both when you attempt to engage the backside. So you have to coordinate your left side moving, your right side moving, driving, an advanced and a pass happening all together, right? And keep that a flow. Also, anywhere in that flow, being ready to bail because, oh crap, the fight just went sideways.
Yeah.
And you better not commit that hard, right?
Right. So that actually, slight tangent I want to talk about real quick, is that because we look at these sort of discrete, we look at actions in fencing are complex, right? Like literally any action that you ever do is going to be a complex action. There are more moving parts in your body than just the one action, right? So you can break it down any number of ways. And when we make an action discrete, and most often the way that we make our actions discrete is we look at the text, and the text says this is the action. And so we say, okay, got it, right? And some of these actions are so complex and they take such a long time, and there are so many subordinate components, right? That but because we've made it discrete, we've programmed ourselves to only think about you do the thing, you set the ball in motion, and then you see it to completion. Right? So like, but there's a problem with that, right? Which is that at any moment in this complex series of actions, especially given some of these particular actions as described by the text, the opponent can change the paradigm, right? The opponent can respond in a way that mitigates or nullifies the effectiveness of the action, and you have to. Most often, it's in the text what to do next, right? But because we programmed ourselves to see these, and that gets to like, when we make things discrete today, we use a very particular lens. We use like the scientific lens, and we take these complex actions and we break them down into elemental parts, right? We try and break them down into elemental parts, and they weren't doing that back then, right? Or at least when I look at like when I say elemental parts, I mean like some actions seem to be made up of many what we might regard as elemental parts, and other actions are made up of half of that, right? Or a quarter of that. So I think that's something that I'm interested in. But sorry, that was my tangent based on what you're saying, because that's basically what you said, right? Was that like in armor we have these long strings of elemental parts that at any moment you have to make an adjustment and you have to change the entire thing.
But that's just fencing. But I think there's more. Well, armor is, at least in this scenario, right? The context that is presented in the manuscript, armor is close quarters combat.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, Bloss is ranged combat. So
Sure.
And in a variety of ways that comes into play.
Yeah.
We could go deeply into that, but
so I'm maybe not deeply, but I just would ask this: would you suggest to someone who's studying Bloss that they should have as a heuristic to try and keep themselves out of wrestling distance? Is sort of like a fundamental principle, like a heuristic principle of the way that they engage with sword. Like, your Bloss, you shouldn't be attempting to wrestle, or at least, so long as you have a sword, that's what you should be. Is that how you would approach that?
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Yeah. Wrestling is a solution. Wrestling at the sword is a solution for fencing terribly. In my opinion. And I love to wrestle,
Yeah,
so
right.
right?
Yeah.
But I mean, to me, that's what I read in the text. I read in the text, they pressed in too close. They made the sword no longer useful. Throw them.
Right.
Because the sword became not useful.
Right. And it's not to say that you shouldn't or you shouldn't be training for it, right? Obviously.
Oh, you should be.
Any opponent, right? If we think of fencing system as sort of like all of your actions are contingent upon your opponent's behavior, because you can only work inside of the thing that they give you, right? So like,
yeah.
Right? There are ways to keep yourself out of distance, but presuming they enter distance, you can use them entering distance as an opportunity to begin to work. The corollary of that is that if you make entering distance your action, like your vor action, then they can work inside that, right? So by doing that, you sort of almost necessarily put yourself behind, right? By making your purpose to wrestle, you put yourself behind. I suppose you can try and get ahead of it by setting up the sort of more complex thing that starts out in the Sufestion or whatever. But like,
sure,
like that's how many steps do you think you're going to get, through, right?
I mean, and God forbid invoking Silver on this podcast, but I mean, he does say that that's the way it is, so.
Right. I already kind of invoked Silver when we were talking about
It's true. It's true. Twice in one. Terrible.
Oh my goodness, we're gonna get torn up. Okay. So
but so if that's Bloss, right? Where we're gonna just take this bold stance that if you're wrestling, you're doing it wrong. In harness, again, to quote the gloss or to paraphrase the gloss, it says basically there's no way to win this if they're standing. You can barely hurt them.
Right.
So the only way to get this job done is to get them thrown down. Right?
Yeah. So all of the blade work is really just setting up positions of advantage, right?
Correct.
It's just tactical milestone after tactical milestone of getting closer and closer in a dominant position so that you can, hopefully by the time you're at this range, you're positioned geometrically or, biomechanically to be able to win.
Yep. Absolutely. And so this is, in part why we're falling to the half sword or to the shortened sword anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're going to just turn this into a short spear / poleaxe, depending on how you use it.
Right.
And we're going to work our way in close, fast, because
Right.
we need this done. Right. And, but there's also the fact that when, for instance, one of the openings you might target is the palm of the hand.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Okay, so again, here is the difference. In Bloss, if you hit the hands, we're like, yeah, you're good to go. Right?
Right. Right.
You did a thing, right? Their hand is messed up.
Mm-hmm.
In armor, you spear through their palm, and you're supposed to use that by driving forward as fast as you can to ram their back of their hand into the wall. You are literally pinning them against the ropes. Once you have them against the ropes, now you pull your dagger and work them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's just not the same application of the art.
Sure. You're right. Yeah, so I find this fascinating. So there's a couple things, right? So like, we have this separate framework, right? Where there are different assumptions about what's happening in the context, right?
Yeah.
And then also, so we've got, so our current way of measuring success in competitive armored combat doesn't seem to prioritize wrestling, right?
Oh,
So,
no. Well, it can. It depends on the
well, so,
rules
I
of
mean,
it.
well, right, but I guess what I'm saying is, like, if we're looking at, or if I'm going based off of the various types of armored combat that I see.
Mhm.
For instance, there was an armored tournament a week ago or 2 weeks ago
Mhm.
in Ohio that I watched some of the clips of. It's just, yeah. So there's lots of wrestling exchanges for sure, but there's also a lot of point fighting, right? So, and
Yep.
by point fighting, I mean fencing in a more familiar way, right? Whereas, like,
Mhm.
I hit, and it's like under the, it's all the places that you're supposed to hit, but then
Yeah.
there's also lots of halts, and um so, I mean, and obviously, how do you judge that type of thing when you're
You don't.
doing it, right? You just um but is it your view that we should be, how would you design a rule set that optimize, I'm hoping you've thought about this before. If you haven't, then I guess, I mean, it's too, it's a huge question. So, like, what, but what would you do? How would you design a rule set to sort of um, to compel the type of behavior that you think is most important uh, to cultivate or optimize or enculturate of in armor combat? Like, it's wrestling. So how do we just ignore point fighting then, or do we try and keep track of the point fighting on the way to the wrestle, or like, or is halting like the best way to do it? And then, so what are your thoughts there?
I don't think we can or should, because we'll kill somebody.
Sure.
And that's really where it is. I think we are counting the point fighting so we don't kill somebody.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing keeping armored combatants safe right now is the fact that we go light.
Right. Right.
And that is a concern that we really need to get behind and think about a lot more if we're going to expand armored tournaments in HEMA. I've seen too many almost murdered people for my personal comfort, even when we're being friendly. Most people I know who have armor don't practice falling in their armor ever. They've never done it as a deliberate practice. And when you ask why, they say, because my helmet isn't safe to fall in.
Yeah.
And then you say, if your helmet isn't safe to fall in, why are we having throws in our tournament?
Right.
I'm shocked we haven't broken a neck, frankly. So I'm not saying we're all so badass and these techniques are all so uber deadly that, you know what I mean? That's not what I'm saying. And I'm not saying that armored tournaments are bad for our armored fencing. I think they're just as good for our armored fencing as, regular tournaments are for BLAS. I think we should have them. I think they're more dangerous and more amateur than we are willing to admit. And I think we need to get real about that.
Yeah.
So
and I think
have very strong feelings.
I think that you bring up a really great point about how much of how safe we are being and how much culture and attitude has to do with that.
Yep.
Right. So when we're designing tournaments or designing rule sets, we often try and do it in a way that the rules prohibit any behavior that's dangerous.
Correct.
Right? Like that's our ideal.
Right.
And that is not only impossible, but it's dangerous just taking that approach.
Yep.
Right? It's dangerous just taking that approach because it's so impossible.
Yes.
And because we assume when we take that approach, we're beginning with an assumption that we can wrap our arms around it. And so therefore, and it's just like what you talked about several episodes ago with the playgrounds, right? Like we try and make these things so, and the truth is what makes activities safe is the culture of behavior. That's what makes an activity safe, right? It's not that there's rubber wood chip things that the kids can fall on and not hurt themselves. It's not that everything's padded. That's not what makes it safe.
Right.
You can spend your entire life using kitchen knives and never cut anybody, right? And you can have a playground that's nominally or notionally safe, and someone get injured every day.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a cultural thing, and there's no amount of rules that you can impose, and there may be a reverse corollary there, right? Where it's like, the more you try and use authoritarian guidelines as a basis for governing dangerous behavior, the less effective they become.
I love it.
It could be. I don't know.
I don't know. But I like that proposition. I'm gonna think on that one.
Right.
But no, I think there's definitely something there, right? I mean, yeah, we all know the stereotypical teenage behavior of all you have to do is tell a kid they don't get to do something to watch them go out and do it, right?
Right.
So yeah, an authoritarian approach doesn't necessarily solve the problem. But yeah, so I would be reticent to try to create a rule set where we're going to I think we would, I probably, you would want to do something like boxing, right? Where you're gonna get points for the round because we saw that you were setting shit up that maybe got reversed or maybe didn't happen or maybe didn't follow through. But like, yeah, you hit that palm, but then you didn't actually gain dominance from hitting that palm. So, right. But we're going to give you points. And that, but you know,
and there's a sort of a general assessment sort of at the end of the thing where you can say like, and actually we've, so obviously people hate that format because they want to feel like they're in more control of what happens. But I've talked about that with several people, just creating like creating a competitive, pseudo competitive sort of atmosphere where fencers are encouraged to fence according to the standards of a panel of judges, right? And so like, and it's not as much about particular hits or, but rather it's like at the end, the judge says, you fenced well, you fenced shitty. I don't know who scored what point. I don't know who scored what point or hit or whatever, but like you won. Good job.
Right.
And so you're kind of suggesting a similar approach here, right?
Right. And that, yeah, if you got in and you got a clean throw and you checked somebody down and you were standing up, like you didn't.
Well, then it'll be clear to all the judges. Right. It'll be clear to all the judges.
Okay.
And then.
But that would be like the equivalent of a KO. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Right.
Then the points don't matter because the KO happened. But if we never get to that, then the points matter. Right. Something like that might be a useful approach if I were going to design one. But I, again, am reticent because I would want to ask everyone there to throw a forward fall in their armor and fucking nobody would do it.
Right.
And that would be the end of that. And I would be sad. And like, and even if you can or do, like, because my legs are trash in mine, every time I fall, my legs get cut. Just so you know, my armor cuts my legs every time I fall in my armor. I still do it. I still practice it.
Yeah.
But I get cuts from my armor. Nobody has to do anything to me for me to be injured in my armor. Mm-hmm. And this is what I mean about how unsafe what we're doing is. That's not an uncommon experience.
Yeah. Right. And maybe, so like the legs, that's a pretty benign place to take a lot of damage, but like.
Yeah, it's no big deal. I just have little cuts all over my shins. Whatever.
But like people who wear all main collars that they got off eBay for $70 are probably, that might be a different kind of scenario. And we just,
Yep. And I mean, and I've seen that. I've seen people that have, gorgets that are out here, the way they fit them.
Oh, okay. God. It's like really, really upsetting.
It's really, really upsetting because what's going to happen if they fall? Number one, you can't tuck your head. Right. So you're going to get concussed. Seen that from that exact scenario, right? That somebody got concussed because they couldn't tuck their head. They took a fall back.
Right.
Well, I'm shocked nobody's broken their jaw yet because that's the other one, that the throw is even a little bit more vigorous and you're going to break your freaking jaw, right? But this is what people are walking out because there are very few people seeking out mentors in armor to ask them, hey, is my armor safe? You've seen all the things that go bad, right? So recognizing your experience in this kit, how is mine? Mm-hmm. And should I fence in it?
Right, exactly. Because I mean, it's pretty, some people might walk into armored combat or armored fighting with a sense of how the body works and a sense of what's important about, what I need to do physically if I'm falling, for instance. So
Right.
like if you take a judoka and you put them in armor and
Yep.
they have an all-main collar that's, that's coming out to right underneath their jaw, they're immediately going to say, wait a minute, I'm supposed to fall in the, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But that's not who, that's not the vast majority of people who are putting themselves in armor. Right. They just don't have that experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we could probably stand to talk more about this forever, and we'll have another armor episode because I have a bunch more questions that I'm interested in getting armor.
We got nowhere.
That's not true. Desire line, baby. That's how we roll.
Welcome to
it. So we are done for today. But again, a reminder to the audience, let's hear, and it could be text, it could be concepts. So like, if you want to talk anything from like what it means to be short or long to what the particular text of the outer intentions are, whatever. Like, we want to hear it from you, and we'll go over it next week. And until then, it was good to see you. And look forward to speaking soon.